Hello Year 7 and welcome to today's lesson. Today we're going to be focusing in on the most famous castle of England, and that is the Tower of London. We're going to look at its purpose and how its uses have changed over time. You probably know that the tower was built by William the Conqueror, and it became a great symbol of Norman power and wealth, as well as being crucial to William maintaining control of London. In the 1,000 years that have followed, the tower has remained a symbol of the wealth, power and stability of the English monarchs, and it's maintained its important, secure military nature. But it's also got some new uses. Over the years, the tower has been used as a prison, a fortress against angry rebels, a place of beheading for England's queens, and even a zoo. Now, when we think about what the tower has been used for, probably the first thing that comes to mind is a fortress. And that's absolutely right. It was really important for William to maintain control of capital and of the Thames via this tower. However, there's also been many other things. It's been a royal palace, a prison, a place of execution, a menagerie, that is a fancy word for a zoo. It's the place where the crown jewels are kept safe. Perhaps you've been there and seen them. A mint. Now, a mint is not a lovely herb. It is a place where we make money. It's also been a home for the yeoman warders, a military storehouse. That's where we keep all our munitions, all our guns and gunpowder and that sort of thing. A barracks where soldiers might stay. A tourist attraction, which is how you will probably have seen it. And during World War II, they even grew vegetables in the tower. How many of those uses did you already know? So, lots of different things that the tower has been used for. But why? Why has this one building been used for so many different things? Well, for a start, it's nearly 1,000 years old, so its function has always shifted and changed to meet the needs of the monarch and the country at the time. But it has always been a secure fortress, and that's the great strength of the tower. So let's now have a look at how the tower developed over time. So after William the Conqueror invaded England and went about asserting his control over the country, he chose the site of the current tower in London. Now, he wanted to ensure he could control the capital city, so he needed an important, strong fortress where he could flee if there was rebellion, but also where he could store lots of arms, lots of weaponry, and control the local population. So he built the White Tower. Future kings went on to add more to the tower. For example, Henry III added the outer walls and the towers to the tower. So he turned it from a stone keep or square keep castle into a concentric castle. Edward I then decided to make the castle a bit more habitable. So he turned it into a luxurious medieval palace. Then you may have heard of Henry VIII. He's our great Tudor king. He added the lodgings for Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn also met her end at the Tower. She was beheaded on Tower Green in 1536. In the 17th century, military storehouses were added. And by the Victorian period, we get places for soldiers, barracks. So the early Norman Tower takes us from 1066 to 1189. And you of course know William from the Bayeux Tapestry. And this is what he built, the central white tower of the complex that is now called the Tower of London. So this is the oldest part of the tower. It would have looked something like this at the time of William's building. Why do you think he chose to build the tower there? Most importantly, he chose this location because it allowed him to control the river. The Thames was very important to not only the security of London, but the security of England as a whole. So lots of his castles, for example, Wallingford and Oxford, they're built on rivers in order to control them. And the most important river to control, of course, is the Thames. He also chose this site because he was able to take advantage of the old Roman walls. Now, these walls had been built around Londinium, that is Roman London, in about 200 AD. So he was making use of some existing defences. At the time it was built, it was one of the first great stone towers in England, and it was the tallest tower in the country. It therefore became a great symbol of the king's power, as well as protection to London from the river, and of course a royal palace. In the medieval period, if you think King John, that's Robin Hood. There he is. In this period, we start to get some of the famous residents of the tower being brought in. We start to get some of the first exotic animals of the tower. For example, here we can see an elephant. Now, this is the period that saw the biggest changes to the architecture of the tower. Apart from later minor changes, Richard II's fortress is the one we know today. It's when it becomes a concentric castle. The tower became a power base in peacetime and a refuge during times of trouble for English kings. During the reigns of Richard I and Henry III, the tower's defences were strengthened by the addition of a curtain wall which surrounds the keep today. Edward I then built a second curtain wall surrounded by a moat. Now, in this period, they also decided to expand the royal residences. And if you go to the tower today, you can go into Edward I's reconstructed bedchamber to see what it would have been like to be in a medieval palace. This period also saw the tower being put to multiple uses. It wasn't just a military fortress and a royal palace, it was also a prison, a place for storing official papers and valuable items, a royal mint, so a place to make money, and a form of zoo, as exotic animals were given to the king by foreign ambassadors. They tended to be housed here in the tower. Can you now answer this question in your books? How did the tower change in medieval times? And what was it used for? Then let's look at the Tudor Tower. Now, the most famous person to reside at the tower in this period is probably Anne Boleyn. Now, you may know that Anne Boleyn is the second wife of Henry VIII. And if you know your nursery rhymes, or you're a horrible history fan, you might remember that Henry has 6 wives. And they all meet pretty nasty fates. Poor old Anne, she's a beheaded. Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Henry got fed up with Anne and thought she had other boyfriends, and so he wanted her dead, he wanted her executed. Anne was brought into the Tower of London through the Traitor's Gate. Now, back in that period, this would have been, it would have had the river going through it, so she would have entered here by barge. She was then locked up in the tower before being beheaded on Palace Green. Now, during the reign of Henry, the tower's role changed. Royal palaces were no longer designed as defensive strongholds because he was a strong monarch in control of his country. And so the king started to favour comfort and luxury over defensive features. And we can see that in some of his great royal palaces, such as Hampton Court. These were all about emphasising his sophistication, his wealth and his splendour. Now this is why Henry added some improvements to the tower, including adding the Queen's House in honour of Anne Boleyn's coronation. That rather shows how quickly a man can change his opinion. Now, it was during the reign of the Tudors that the tower acquired its bloody reputation as a prison and a place of execution. There were quite a few notable opponents of the king and the monarchs after him kept here in the Tower of London, and it became a site of beheading. You might have heard of Thomas More, Anne Boleyn, Lady Jane Grey, the girl who was queen for only 9 days, Walter Raleigh, the Earl of Essex, even Princess Elizabeth, the future Elizabeth the First, was kept at the Tower of London. Now, what's really cool is that lots of these prisoners left their mark on the building. And today, when you go in to some of the buildings, you can see inscriptions that they've graffitied onto the wall. Now, in the Tudor period, this is what the tower would have looked like. Could you now answer this question in your book? How was the tower used in Tudor times? Why? Let's move on now and have a look at the tower in Victorian times. At the start of the Victorian era, the tower was home to the Royal Mint, so again, the place that makes money. It was a public records office, a branch of ordnance, and it was responsible for military supplies for the army and the navy. And it was also a zoo. In this period, it became much more of a tourist attraction because people who were living through the Victorian era were seeing the growth of towns and cities, factories, and the modern day, we might say. And increasingly, they became nostalgic for medieval times that they thought would have been a lot nicer. So they became quite a fan of the medieval look, and they liked to go back and imagine medieval times in this period. We call this kind of fancy for the medieval the Gothic. Now, can you please answer this question in your books? Why did the tower become a tourist attraction? And what else was the tower used for in Victorian times? Let's move on to the 20th and 21st century, so that's 1900 onwards. Well, what's it used for? At the moment, it's primarily used as a tourist attraction. You may well have gone there yourself. But it is also still a fortress, and it's still home to the crown jewels. And we still have yeoman warders and their families, so they still actually live within the castle. During World War II, London was heavily bombed by the Germans in the Blitz. So we can see the castle there in the Blitz in that image. But also during World War II, everybody was encouraged to dig for victory. That is, people were encouraged to grow their own vegetables. This is because it was increasingly difficult to get fruit and vegetables shipped in from other countries. So we were trying to be as self-sufficient as you possibly can be. In this time, they used the moat as an allotment, so a place to grow vegetables. Imagine that. Fighting the Nazis by growing my vegetables in my medieval fortress. Also during World War II, the tower was used as a prison for German spies. And a German spy named Joseph Jacobs became the last person to be executed at the tower in 1941. So today, the tower is one of the most popular tourist attractions in England. It receives 2.5 million. Now your task for today is to choose a time period. It could be the Norman, medieval, Tudor, Victorian, or 20th century. Then I want to imagine you are a resident in the tower. Now it could be that you work in the tower. Perhaps you're the chief executioner. Or maybe you're a simple guardsman, a yeoman. Maybe you're a beefeater. Or maybe you're a prisoner in the tower. I'd like you to write a short story to show a day in the life of those in the tower. What's happening? Are there any big events? Perhaps a bombing raid is happening during World War II. Or perhaps you're going to describe digging up your plants in the allotment, in the moat. Perhaps today is the day of Anne Boleyn's execution. Or perhaps you're going to describe yourself as a Victorian visitor seeing their fancy animals in the zoo. What roles is the tower being used for? What can you see? Are you going to meet any famous faces in your time at the tower? Once you've finished your short story, which should hopefully be about an A4 side, please submit it to me on Show My Homework. I'm really excited to see all of these. Good luck!